solve for x squared plus x equals 12. And then it says, help? So, help?
That sounds like one of my students. Could be, I don't know. But so this equation's a little bit more difficult to solve than your more basic algebra equations. And part of the reason is this x squared. That exponent makes it a little bit more difficult. Not impossible, though. So this x squared, this makes it a quadratic equation. And quadratic equations, you got a couple options when you're going to solve them. Number one, the option would be is to break it down into its factors. So factor it, and then use the zero product property to solve it. And that's what I'm going to show you how to do today. The other option that you have to solve quadratic equations is to use the quadratic formula. And what's great about the quadratic formula is that it always works, but it's complicated. It's that thing, you may have seen this before, it's x equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So it sounds really complicated. It always works, which is great, but it's, as I'm saying, the con to using that rather than factoring it is that it's kind of complicated. So we're going to use we're going to factor it and we're going to use the zero product property. First, before we do that, we want to get our quadratic equation into general form, which looks like the equation that I wrote on the top of the screen. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So essentially we need to set our equation equal to 0. The way we'll do that is, you can see on the right-hand side of the equation there's a 12, and we want to make that a 0. And so in order to do that, we're going to subtract 12 from both sides of our equation. And then that would make that right side actually equal 0. So 0 on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, we have x squared plus x minus 12 equals 0. Now, if you had been watching yesterday or last week, I introduced what's called the area model. And we use the area model basically to multiply two factors together to get a quadratic equation into general form. Now we're going to use it backwards to find out what the factors are of the equation. So the way that you set this up is in the top left-hand box, you're going to put your first term, so x squared. In the bottom right box, you're going to put the last term, so negative 12. Now at this point, we need to find factors, so lengths and widths, that are going to multiply to give us this whole equation. So that means this part right here that goes with the x squared, x, and then x would go on the sides, and that's because x times x equals x squared. Then the part, I'm drawing arrows to it right now, that's a little bit trickier. We need to find something that's going to multiply together to give us this negative 12, but then we'll add together to give us this middle term, this positive 1x. And so one way I organize that is I'll go off to the side and I will write down all of the things that multiply together to give me 12. And I skipped 1, 2, and 6. And then I look at these number combinations and I decide, okay, if I were to add these two or subtract these two, what could give me that middle term of 1? And so thinking about, all right, 1 and 12, well, I could get, if I added them, I could get 13. If I subtracted them, I'd get 11, so that's not going to work. If I added 3 and 4 together, I'll get 7. If I subtract them, I get 1, so that's a possibility. And then the last pair, 2 and 6, if I added them, I'd get 8. If I subtract, I'd get 4. That's not what we're looking for either. So it's going to be this pair of numbers, 3 and 4. We're just going to have to adjust our signs to make sure that they do actually add up to give us that 1x. So if you go back, look over back to that area model again, 3 and 4, I just put in those factors. Now I know that they have to add to give me a positive 1x and multiply to give me negative 12. So that means one of them is going to be negative. And it's going to have to be this 3 because 4 plus negative 3 gives me positive 1. Filling in the rest of the box just to double check, right here would be 3x because negative 3 times x. On the bottom left would be 4x because 4 times x is 4x. Putting it all together, The inside, you'll notice if you added that all back up, equals the polynomial that we started with. The outsides are the factors. So x minus 3 and x plus 4. And that still equals 0. So all we did from the x squared plus 1x minus 12 equals 0 to that next step is we just broke it down into its factors, kind of like this. Let's say I had the number 24. I could rewrite that in a way as 3 times 8. Both of those still equal 24. It's just I'm breaking it down into the two things that multiply to equal it. The last step is using that zero product property. That part sounds complicated because it's, zero product property. What is that? All that is playing on is the fact that anything times 0 equals 0. So when you look at that equation, x minus 3 times x plus 4, if either one of those two factors equaled 0, it would make this equation true. So what we will do is actually find out what would x be if x minus 3 is 0. So we just write that down, and then we will solve for x by getting it by itself. So in this case, if x is 3, it would make our equation true. And then for the other part, x plus 4 is 0. We're going to get x by itself by subtracting 4 from both sides. It would give us negative 4. So that's another solution for x that would make this equation true. So a lot of explanation. These quadratic equations are kind of complicated. What I did is I just showed you one of the methods. So looking back on the right-hand side, I just showed you one of the methods to solving a quadratic equation, which is to factor and then use the zero product property. You can always go and check your work by replacing your x back into your original equation, which in this case, these two numbers would work. But definitely quadratic equations, kind of complicated algebra for sure. And hopefully that helped a little bit. I can always go into that more if you have more specific questions or other questions on how to do other equations.